This is Big Bass University, the leading authority in outdoor educational programming.
Hi, I'm Captain Steve Horvath, and today we're going to talk about an introduction to coastal waterfowl hunting. I've been hunting waterfowl for over 35 years, and I've learned a lot of lessons, some the hard way. We spent this past waterfowl season actually filming. We set out decoys, we've done diagrams, we did all we can do to help teach a new hunter how to hunt coastal waterfowl. The first thing I have to say is waterfowl hunting in the coast is different. How's it different? Well, there's salt water. Now, we really don't see sharks. We do see some seals and some other stuff, and sometimes even have striped bass popping right outside the decoys. But the main thing is coastal waterfowl hunting is different, and you need to hunt a little differently than you would on your pond or creek. First thing is, it's different because some of the bays that we hunt are 2 miles across or even more. So we do need bigger boats, bigger decoys, and we really need to be prepared when we go out. We also hunt the ocean. We hunt the inlets and out, past the inlets in the open ocean, sometimes out to 2 or 3 miles offshore. So you really need to be prepared, but you really get to see stuff you'd never see in other places. We have tidal swings. Now, some people that hunt inland have some tide, but what happens is where we're at, a lot of times you have enough tide that where you think is plenty of water and, well, you wind up high and dry 4 or 5 hours later. So you really need to pay attention to these things. Now, what species do we encounter? Well, we encounter some of the stuff that most people encounter. We have puddle ducks. We have way more divers than you will see inland. We have sea ducks like the scoter. And the big thing is we have Atlantic brant. They're very commonly just found near salt water and almost never away from it. So the first thing we have to be able to do if we're going to hunt is to identify the different duck species we're going to see. Now, puddle ducks are fairly easy. Most people grow up around where they see puddle ducks, and this is a drake mallard. You'll notice that the drake mallard has a relatively long neck. It's got white under its wings, and its wings flap at a moderate rate. So if you see a duck like that, particularly if it's flying high off the water, you can be pretty assured that what you're looking at is a puddle duck. Now, a diver duck, like this bufflehead, has a much shorter body, shorter neck, a pretty big head for its size, and its wings are pretty far back on its body. One of the things you'll notice about diver ducks is they generally fly very low to the water and they flap their wings very fast. Sea ducks, like this white-winged scoter, they fly at a moderate height, but what they do is they fly up and down the coast. They are very, very rarely found anywhere inland, generally in salt water only. Now, the last one is the Atlantic brant. Like I said before, this bird is rarely found in other places, and it's really considered a trophy to people that come from inland that want to hunt down the shore. Now, let's talk about some of the equipment for coastal waterfowl hunting, and the first thing we'll talk about is boats. The first boat we're going to look at is the sneak box, or Barnegat Bay sneak box as it's usually called. Now, these boats are small. They're generally around 12 feet. They don't put much more than about a 15 horsepower motor on it, and it's a 1 or a 2 person boat. The next is your commercially made duck boat. Now, these duck boats are made out of either fiberglass or aluminum. They come in sizes up to 27 feet now, if you can believe that, with motors up to well over 200 horsepower. They can hold a lot more gear, a lot more people, but generally they don't get into quite as shallow water as your other boats. Now, there's also the aluminum boats. Now, what we're looking at is a semi-V aluminum boat, which is very similar to mine. The nice thing about these boats is they can handle most water conditions, and the blind that you put on there is removable. So if you like to fish in the off season, it's a great boat to have. Let's take a look at decoys. Decoys come in basically two sizes. You have your life-size decoys, which are, well, they're life-size, and your magnum decoys, which are much bigger, generally 25% to a full third bigger. Now, why do you use a magnum-sized decoy? Well, if you're hunting big water and the birds are coming from far away, you want them to see the decoys as quickly as possible. Now, let's look at this puddle duck decoy. You'll notice that this is a mallard decoy. It's a plastic decoy. The decoys are almost painted like a clown, is a terminology you'll hear a lot in waterfowl hunting. The colors are overemphasized for contrast so the birds can see them. These decoys are generally placed pretty close to shore. Next is a diver decoy. This diver is a bufflehead. You'll notice that, like most divers, this decoy has a lot of black and white on it. Again, these colors are overemphasized so ducks can see them. This is an old squaw decoy. Old squaw is a type of sea duck, and just like the other decoys, colors are overemphasized, but also much more magnum decoys are used for these sea ducks. Now here's a sea duck decoy, and you're going to take a look at this sea duck decoy and say, boy, it looks like an 8-year-old painted it. Well, in truth, an 8-year-old did paint it. It was an old mallard decoy, and sea ducks are not the brightest ducks out there. So a lot of times you can take some old decoys, paint them up, and have decoys that sea ducks will come into. This next decoy is a bluebill, or broadbill as they call them down the shore in a lot of places. Again, it's a diver decoy, and you'll notice that the green on the head is overemphasized, the white on the body is overemphasized. Next is our goose decoy. This decoy is great because it can be seen from a long ways away. A lot of times, even ducks will just see the big white patch on the goose or the white on the rump and come in close. Now, the reason for all these different decoys we're talking about is because I like to hunt for multiple species of birds at one time. Now, when we're hunting multiple species, what we're going to do is we're going to place our puddle ducks close to the shoreline. Then we'll take some more puddle ducks and put them on the other side of the boat. Next, we'll take a pair of puddle ducks and put them out farther. We'll take some goose decoys, put them even closer to the shoreline. Now, the reason for this is because a lot of times ducks will not fly over goose decoys as they approach. The other reason is because geese sometimes land very short of the decoys. Next, we're going to put some diver decoys. You'll notice they're still upwind past the boat. Now, what this does is it keeps the birds in front of the boat. Next, we'll take a long line of decoys. Now, diver ducks will follow these long line decoys into that open spot in front of the boat. And that open spot is our kill zone. That's where we expect to shoot at the birds. Let's talk a little bit about equipment. The first big thing that we need is waders. The water's much too cold to go out and walk around. Now, these waders are neoprene and they're insulated. What you want is exactly this, neoprene insulated waders. The other thing you're going to want to have is you're going to be walking around in the water, so you're going to need a waterproof wader jacket. Now, if you'll notice, this is not a parka length. This is a jacket length. What that does is that keeps your coat out of the water while you're wading around. Otherwise, it's going to soak up water. The next thing we have to talk about is guns and ammo. In 1991, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, well, what they did was they banned lead shot. So now you're stuck with steel shot or a steel shot substitute. One of the most common sizes of steel shot is the size number 2. Size number 2 is used for ducks of mallard size and smaller, and it's quite a good shot. Size number 1 we use for birds larger than a mallard, or when a mallard is the smallest bird we're going to shoot. Finally, the size BB is the size shot that we're going to use for sea ducks and hunting geese. let's talk a little bit about safety. It's cold and it's wet, and the first thing we have to do is we have to be safe while we're wading. Now, if you notice in this picture, I'm wading in, well, it's wide open there. It's 2 miles across. But I've already been to the spot. I know that it's a sand bottom. I know that I can walk out 80 yards in this spot from where I put my boat. As you can see, I'm way offshore and I'm waist deep. In a lot of other areas, you'd be way over your head. Now, you have to remember that when you're putting out your decoys in the morning, you're wading out there in complete darkness. So all this is done in the dark, so you really need to be careful and you need to know where you're wading before you wade. Let's talk about the tides. As you can see here, there's plenty of water. Every 6 hours, the tide changes, which means you may show up and it may look like this. The tide's partially out. Hey, everything's still okay. A few hours later, now you have this. You may be waiting another 6 or 8 hours to get out of there. Let's talk a little bit about rough water. The water's big and it's wide. It's wide open also, which means it's really affected by wind. Waves can come up fast. You need to know ahead of time what the weather's supposed to be and then keep an eye on what the weather really is and get out of there if you need to. Let's talk a little bit about some safety equipment. 3 big things we have in the way of safety equipment. Number 1 is a handheld radio. Your handheld radio can do 2 things for you. Number 1, you can call the Coast Guard on channel 16. Number 2, you can also tune into the weather and get updates. The second thing is your cell phone. Now there's 3 numbers that you should have in your cell phone. Number 1 is your local Coast Guard station, the closest one to you. It gives you another lifeline. The second one would be CETO. If you break down, you can call them. They'll come and get you. The third is your buddy's phone number. Now, what you want to do is every time you shoot a duck and your buddy's not there, take a picture and call his phone number and send him the picture. The third thing we want to talk about is a flare kit. Certain sizes of boats, they really don't need a flare kit by law. But what I say is have a flare kit with you, have a full flare kit, have the gun, have the flares, have the safety mirror, anything that you might be able to use to get attention from a passing boat, because a lot of times there are not a lot of boats out on the water and you don't want to spend the night out there. Now, let's look at 5 tips for better duck hunting. Number 1, scout whenever possible. Scouting includes looking with binoculars, driving around with the boat, putting a lot of miles on your car, whatever it takes to find concentrations of waterfowl. Have multiple spots available to hunt. This goes without saying, but if you look at this bay, and that's Barnegat Bay right there, there are about 1 jillion spots to hunt, but unless you've already investigated them, you won't have a backup spot. What happens if you go and you have a prime point picked out and somebody else is there? If you don't have a choice A, B, C, or even D to hunt, you may be out of luck. So you have to have multiple spots. Know the tendencies and the habits of the different duck species. Now, what does that mean? Let's take a look at 2 ducks that don't look that much different, but live in definitely different habitats. The ducks on the left are mallards. They're puddle ducks. They generally are on smaller bodies of water. The ducks on the right are diver ducks. They're canvasbacks. They're generally found in open water. It would make no sense to have a duck boat full of canvasback decoys if you're setting up on a puddle where mallards would show up. Now, when you're out hunting canvasbacks, if you're on the edge of the mallards range, on the edges of the open marsh, then maybe a few mallard decoys should be with you, but you would mainly have diver decoys with you. Keep your equipment organized. Now, keeping your equipment organized does a couple of things for you. You can see that my decoys are in a decoy bag. Number 1, they won't get worn and they won't get damaged, which is a great thing. The second thing is Your decoys are organized so you always know what's in each bag. The third and last thing is you don't want a boat full of decoys around your feet so you're stepping over them, tripping over them, tangling decoy lines. It really is important to have your equipment organized. Rigging decoys. Let's talk about rigging single decoys versus long lines. Single decoys are rigged, which would be puddle ducks and geese. Now, these decoys need to be put out pretty random. As you can see, there are some pairs next to each other. There are decoys that are facing in different directions. It looks like birds that you would naturally see along the shoreline. A long line of decoys is generally used for diver ducks or sea ducks. As you could see from this long line, the ducks are, well, they're in a line. And what happens is you're going to put out several long lines and it'll appear as a mass of ducks. So what you have is birds that aren't so worried about a very natural looking spread, but in this case, we're directing the birds with the long lines. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. How many times have you gone out and hunted and seen a duck species you don't normally see, but they're not attracted to what you have? So what we recommend is having a mixed bag spread out to where you have puddle ducks and diver ducks and even geese in one spread. What happens is, in this case, we harvested diver ducks and puddle ducks. There's pintail, there's mallards, and there's buffleheads, all in one bag. Now, on this day, we took diver ducks, geese, and puddle ducks, all in one day because of a mixed bag spread. On this day, we took 3 different species of divers. We got bluebills, we shot a bufflehead, and a canvasback, because not only were we diver hunting, but we had different species of diver decoys out, which attracted all of those birds. Now let's talk about something that I call the crosswind advantage. Duck hunters are told from the time that they're in diapers that you always want the wind at your back. Now the wind at your back is good, but what happens is when a duck approaches the decoys, with your wind at your back, you notice that duck is looking forward. What that duck is going to see is going to be your decoys, but the closer he gets, the more he's going to be looking at your boat and any movement in the boat. Now, by simply moving the boat off to the side of the decoy spread, with that same wind, you create a crosswind. Now, as this duck gets closer, he's going to come in, and he's not going to be looking at the boat. He's going to be looking at the area that he wants to land. There is an old adage that a hunter wants the wind blowing from them to the ducks. If the ducks are approaching the blind head on, they're looking directly at the blind and any movement the hunters make. As we look at what fowl would see as they approach the decoys from a crossing angle, notice that the blind and any movement of the hunters can only be detected from the edge of their vision. As the birds get closer to the decoys, they actually see less of the blind. By using this approach, hunters will get more chances to harvest ducks and geese at closer ranges. In closing, you need to learn the birds that are in your area, do your pre-season and in-season scouting, use the proper decoy spreads, and use the crosswind to your advantage. And one more thing, buy our DVD.
For more seminars like this one, go to bigbashuniversity.com.